I guess I'd want to start with just a brief history of a couple of occupations that I've had that lead up very well to what I want to share with you today. The first is that I spent a little over 10 years working on a large agri farm, about 1,500 acres. And one of my primary positions there was as the crop duster, spraying the entire crop with pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and the like. And not realizing what an impact that occupation would have on me later in life. But fast forwarding to the second occupation that lends itself well to my story today is I spent about 18 years in the auto repair business, about half of which I had my own auto repair shop known as the Car Doctor. And it was during that time at the Car Doctor that I was faced with a few serious life challenges that left me feeling less adequate about myself, let's say, or less capable of what I was able to do. And I became very withdrawn from pretty much everything, even my family here at home. I spent a week in bed and without eating barely anything, never getting out of bed, going anywheres. And everybody around me was like, well, he's depressed. And so eventually I was talked into and went willingly to the emergency room because I could see this wasn't going to end well, being stuck in a cave for one whole week, not even wanting to live. So I went to the emergency room and started a journey that lasted just under 6 years. And I'm kind of still amazed that at the end of this time period I wasn't actually any better than when I began. And a big reason for that is I don't think in my particular case, let's go back to the auto repair world. In order for me to fix a car, I need to first diagnose the problem. I can't begin to have a solution to fix any problem with any car without first understanding what exactly is going on here. And in this particular case with my mental health issues, I was diagnosed with what's known as bipolar disorder. And I was told at that point from a psychiatric doctor that I would be on medication for the rest of my life. I would need to be seeing a psychiatrist in order to get these medications, and that it would probably be wise for me to see a psychologist or a therapist on a regular basis to be able to talk about these things. And again, he said, for the rest of your life. And then he went on to throw the knife in my back a little farther, said, you'll probably never work a 40-hour job again. You'd be lucky, as a matter of fact, to even be able to have a 20-hour part-time job. That might even be too much for you. You might just find yourself doing volunteer work. And again, this was all for the rest of your life. I was barely just over 50. I expected a long life yet to go. This wasn't good news. So, in this medical model world that I found myself in, with this diagnosis of a mental illness, with what I thought I was a very capable person. I've got my own business, very successful, $500,000 in revenue a year with just a couple of people. I was on a roll. So to be told I can't do something was just very odd for me. But along this process, I was hospitalized a number of times, 5 times to be exact, locked up behind doors in the psychiatric unit, and basically their primary method for me to be well was to hand me pills. And at one point they had me on 8 different medicines, all for the same one diagnosis of bipolar. I'm like, 8 different medicines? That's like a car coming in with a coolant leak, and we put in a water pump and a radiator and a heater core and a couple of radiator hoses in. I mean, that just seemed a bit over the top for me. And it actually was, because eventually, and not very long, with 8 medicines, my body became very toxic. The chemicals I was putting in my body accumulated, and we have what's called toxicity to medications. Pharmaceutical medications can cause a toxicity in the body. And I wound up back in the emergency room with all kinds of crazy symptoms from this toxic mess that I was in. And the odd thing, in the emergency room, they put me in a room with no windows. The doors are locked, like I'm some kind of a bad human being. But the nurse comes along after I've been in there for an hour or so, and she's got this cup and a little thing of water. And I said, "What are you doing?" She says, "I'm here to give you your meds." And I go, "What?" And she had a whole handful of medication she wanted me to take. And I go, "Are you people paying attention? I'm here because I'm on too much medicine. My body's toxic, and now you want to give me more medicine. I don't think anybody's listening." She said, "Well, the doctor said you have to." I said, "Well, I haven't even talked to a doctor yet. All I've talked to is nurses." And she's like, "Well, the doctor says you have to take these." I said, "Well, then you can tell the doctor to come in here, and he can bring him in with him, and we'll talk about it." I wasn't about to take these medicines. That's why I was there. It was absolutely absurd to me. When I look at this, like, wait a minute, 8 medicines, they want me to take more. They're not really hearing that my body's toxic. That's why I'm back here again. And this whole thing just seemed absurd. And when I go back to my car repair days, I'm thinking, wait a minute, you can bolt all kinds of parts onto this car, but if we're not getting any results, if the car still drives out of here with a coolant leak, then we haven't really done much, have we? And that's kind of like what was happening with me. I spent 5.5 years with this approach of psychiatric and psychologists and therapists and nothing but pills, but the coolant leak was still in the car, and it was getting worse. So I remember getting up one day and looking at Facebook and seeing a post that a friend of mine had put there. It was a video called The Gerson Miracle. And it was a film or documentary about this guy, Dr. Max Gerson, who back in 1928 had found a cure for cancer. And I found this quite interesting. And I watched this film, and it literally is the turning point for me to get out of this mental illness situation that I found myself in, where I had been given nothing but pills for 5+ years. So watching this film, Gerson was talking about how the body was able to heal itself as long as we give it the proper tools to be able to do so. Gerson back then was curing all kinds of diseases, yet he was using the same basic method, and he was kind of confused at first, but he came to the realization that he wasn't actually curing the body of any of these illnesses. The body was doing it itself. All he was doing was providing the body with the proper tools and nutrition in order for the body to be able to do that. And I thought that quite interesting, and I was giving it quite a heavy thought, especially when I'm just washing the dishes and looking out my window at the squirrels running around in the backyard. I thought, I'd never seen those squirrels in the emergency room. I never see them take any medicine. They're just out there fending for themselves with what nature's giving them. And they seem to be doing okay, like most any other animal on this planet. So why are we being fed all this medicine when all the rest of nature is able to cure most of whatever ails it just by doing what it's supposed to do, eating the proper foods? So that's what this Gerson film had done for me. As a matter of fact, immediately after watching the film, within an hour, I was at a store getting all organic produce for a salad, and I came home and sat down and ate just a salad, all organic salad, and I just can't believe it. It tasted like dessert. The flavor that was coming out of that food just knocked me over, and I was drawn into this whole process just by that one film. And so I went on this mission of education to find out more. What was Gerson talking about? And how might this relate to this situation I'm faced in, where I'm getting 8 different medications thrown in my body to try to cure some illness that I'm not even sure was an appropriate diagnosis to begin with. But following what Gerson did, it led me to another amazing film called Forks Over Knives. And T. Colin Campbell, one of the doctors in that film, who, by the way, was the co-author in one of the largest studies done on this planet, known as the China study. Well, Dr. Campbell just came along behind the Max Gerson film and just gave me a ton of more information that helped continue for me down this path of wellness. And how can my body heal itself if I give it the proper things? And so that's kind of what's happened to me, is that I went from this routine or this method of treating my mental illness with pills and talk therapy to actually providing my body with far less toxic chemicals, both in the foods and water and whatever it is in my environment. Paying attention to these toxic things became very important. And I also found it quite odd that at this point, figuring out my body's full of toxins, that's one of the problems, my brain's misfiring, is because of all these toxins. And it's kind of odd when you go to the hospital and what do they want to give you? The pills are nothing but more chemicals. So there are more toxins. It's just absurd when I think about it. To be toxic to begin with, and then the cure is to add to that toxicity. But anyways, I was able to get away from all of these psychiatric or psychotropic medications, as they're known. And for the last 6 or 7 years, my total prescription drug cost amounts to $5.98. Yeah, $5.98 for the last 6 or 7 years. That's my total prescription drug cost. I don't take medicine anymore. This is kind of what the first approach was for me to be well. And let's talk about this. That wasn't very helpful for me. This is just a small sample of what I was on. It doesn't look very appetizing, does it? But so when I went to this Gerson miracle and came into, well, what's really going to help my body? This is a medicine I have now. This is what's helped me. If I want to be well, then I figured out I need to put things in my body that will help my body fight the things that are causing me not to be well. This was kind of like a toxic flush right here for me. When I get into this world, and I want to tell you, this stuff sure is a whole lot better tasting, and the side effects, of which there aren't any, are far better than this. This led me to nowhere. And for 5.5 years being on this process, I actually went and got a copy because I was kind of interested what exactly was spent on my behalf in order for me, in attempt to be well, through this system of pills and psychotherapy. And it's interesting, I actually got a printout from my 5.5-year history from all the psychiatric type stuff. This is nothing but pills, medicine, psychiatric visits, psychotherapy, psychiatrists. Look, folks, I can't even unroll this whole thing. This thing is over 10 feet long. And it comes to about $205,000 worth of services that were charged on my behalf in an attempt to help me work through this bipolar issue. I think this is absurd. So this chart right here is showing you about hundreds of these. Literally hundreds of this. Right here. This is the method on this piece of paper. And I can tell you it didn't work. So this thing created a huge awakening for me when I got this report. And $205,000 in 5.5 years. Well, the interesting thing is now when I go to buy my groceries and I buy all organic food, like what's in this bowl here, this is all organic food stuff. And like I said earlier, I was a crop duster on a very large agricultural farm here in southern Maine. And I was a guy spraying all the pesticides. I don't want to eat those. These don't contain any of that stuff. So, but the interesting thing here, back to the money, $205,000 I was showing you on that chart. And since I've changed my medicine from this to the all organic food, as I mentioned before, the last 5 or 6 years, $5.98 in my prescription drug cost. And that was just for an oral mouth rinse. It had nothing to do with bipolar. So I went from $205,000 to $5.98. And the interesting thing is a lot of my friends say, but Jeff, that organic food costs more. I go, yeah, but only at the register. Because once I go home and I start eating this stuff, I no longer have any of this. $205,000 of this, folks. If you want to buy the conventional food and buy this as well, I don't think the organic food costs anymore. Matter of fact, for me, the end result is a huge savings. Huge. I can't even begin to tell you. I mean, some of these meds I was on $1,000 a month. I don't spend $1,000 extra per month on the extra cost between conventional grown food and organic food. It's just not possible. I don't eat that much food. But I know one thing. In the last 5 or 6 years, I've never felt so good. As I continue to purge these toxins out of my body, I just continue to become more and more well. And that's what I originally went to the hospital for. I went there to become well. And in this world, in the mental health world, what happened for me is I spent 5.5 years talking and working with nothing. All we ever talked about was my illness. And what I actually did is I stopped talking about the illness, stopped focusing on the illness because I didn't want to be ill. I went to the hospital to be well. So if I went there to be well, why aren't we talking about things that lead to wellness? That's what was really missing in this whole journey was, wait a minute. It's as though they wanted to let my bipolar stand. Let's let that illness be and let's just treat it. And what I did, going back to my auto repair world, is no, let's figure out what the problem is, what's causing it, and let's try to come up with a solution that at least minimizes the bipolar symptoms. Or my best hope was that I could find a way where all those symptoms would just disappear because they were coming from all these toxins in my body. So that's what's actually happened to me. And it's truly amazing that I can sit here today having been through all that, and I am the evidence of what I'm speaking of. The pills didn't help. A good, healthy diet gives my body the tools it needs to make whatever repairs are necessary to keep me going, just like the squirrels. I never see the squirrels in the emergency room, nor do I ever see them running across the railing in my back deck, stopping and saying, hey, Ethel, how many calories do we eat today? They just don't do that stuff like we do. And a big part of this brought me back to a time in Homo sapiens world that I call pre-fire. When I got to thinking, what is it that I want to eat? Or what should we as humans be eating in order to not have all these maladies that we're having, all these illnesses that are going across our country? I mean, it's out of control. the health problems that are created by what we're eating here in the Western diet. So one of the interesting things that I've observed in this journey is an observation I made after watching another incredible documentary called Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead. And the gentleman that was the key focus of that film was from Australia, and he had what he called a rare skin disease, where his skin would actually break out into a rash, and at times it would become so bad it would become, blood would actually be seeping right out of his skin. It would become so raw. And this gentleman, same thing. The film starts out with him holding up and showing all the pills and everything that the doctors were giving him for this. Again, they claim he had a rare skin disease or disorder. Yet, he kind of did the same thing that I've just described, where he found and tripped into this whole world where healthy eating and eliminating all the toxins in his world. And he went on this journey of fasting and drinking juices made from all organic foods like carrots and apples and things like that. He went on a 60-day fast of just nothing but juice. But what he found in this process was this rare skin disease that the doctors diagnosed him with. It went away. And as long as he kept eating the healthy foods, this so-called disease never returned. So I'm thinking, well, that's not a disease then. Why are they calling it a disease if it went away? I mean, that's kind of like saying, if I drink battery acid and it burns a hole in my stomach, then I've got battery acid burns a hole in the stomach disease. The disease is a lack of knowledge about what it is we're putting in our bodies. This gentleman didn't have a rare skin disorder. His body was flatly, outright rejecting what it is he was putting in his body. And it was telling him that by these skin rashes that he was seeing. He didn't have a disease. The disease is more one of the mind, in that we're absolutely not paying attention when we call something like that a disease. It's absurd. It's ridiculous. I mean, if you know that drinking battery acid is going to cause a problem, then it's probably just not wise to drink battery acid. But to call something a disease as a result of doing something like that is just silly. So when I had changed this diet after watching the Gerson Miracle, one of the first things I noticed was I started losing weight. I lost like 50 pounds in like 4 months or something. And I wasn't even out to lose weight. But and I was starting to get more energy, and I was just starting to feel cleaner inside. And I don't know, it just wasn't as exhausted and tired and all that. And I was just learning as I was going, what kind of foods can you even eat to give you more energy? And it's just an amazing bunch of stuff out there. Dr. Robert Morse is a guy very worthy of watching. This guy, if you want energy in your life, go watch this guy on YouTube. He'll tell you how to get it, just with eating. But I don't know, for me, I guess the results of this change of diet were almost seen immediately. Just in even my digestive system saw an improvement right off the bat. Becoming more regular and all that stuff. It was just, and learning about my upper gut health. That's where I'm at kind of these days. I'm focusing on my upper gut health in an effort to help my mind become as clear and functioning to the best of its ability. And it's just amazing. I didn't realize serotonin and melatonin, a lot of these chemicals the brain uses are created by the gut, in the gut. So my gut health was absolutely poor. But yeah, I'd have to say I saw improvements right within the first week.
So, are we talking physical and mental health? I mean, how is your how did your mental health change?
My mental health changed in a big way because when I get rid of these toxins in my body, my brain was able to kind of not go to these extremes that it was going to, that the doctors were looking at going, well, he's bipolar because of these mood swings. I mean, I could go from being depressed and not wanting to even get out of bed to just a half an hour later having, more of a manic kind of condition where I just a ball full of energy. And it was very unstable in that way. And a lot of these foods helped bring me and balance me out and level me out and keep me from being all over the place. And it was rather quickly.
Were you surprised when it started to happen? I mean, did it just make sense to you?
Both, really. I was very surprised at what was happening, but it all made sense to me. And in a big way, again, because of some of these previous occupations I've had, both with the auto repair world and my time on the farm, that I could see that what was happening in the farm was contributing to what was going on in my brain. I mean, when we spray these chemicals. I mean, one of the recent figures that are coming out now is one of the worst chemicals being sprayed these days is known as glyphosate, which was originally a descaling agent that was manufactured and made to help clean out like boilers and stuff, because it would clean the scale off the pipes and stuff and boilers. And when they took this stuff out and dumped it on the lawn, they found out, wow, it killed all the grass and weeds and everything. And so somebody came along and said, wow, that'd make a great weed killer. And so that's what we have, folks. We have this weed killer that was originally a descaling agent for boilers and whatnot, and that's being sprayed on our foods. But this glyphosate now is such a contaminant in our food system. We now even have foods that are genetically modified to be able to be sprayed with this chemical so that they won't sustain damage in the spraying process. But I read something recently, and this is quite disturbing, where glyphosate has been found in the blood of the placenta of newborn babies in upwards of nearly 70% of newborns in the U.S. Glyphosate in the blood of the placenta of newborn babies. So the babies, before they're even born, are now having this pesticide running through their body before they've even entered the world. It's no wonder there's a lot of people who've been diagnosed with mental illness and all these other things. That's the other thing that I found when I started changing this diet is there's all kinds of benefits. And the more I looked into this, the more I found people with diabetes and hypertension and high blood pressure, high cholesterol. All of these things would improve with this diet that I was on, and all I was looking for was to have a little more energy. And I tripped into this world, and not only did I have more energy, I lost all kinds of weight, and there's all these other things that I'm sure I'm not likely to be a diabetic person now with what I'm eating.
What do you think that if you were to summarize, what is the problem in America today? If you were to just tell me in a nutshell, do we have a problem and what is it?
So I think one of the biggest problems we have in this country in relation to what I'm speaking about is the fact that we have available to us on a readily basis, we can go into pretty much any grocery store anywheres in this nation and buy all kinds of food that we shouldn't even consider taking home. And we need to educate ourselves as to what are those foods so that we don't take them home, but more importantly, what are the foods that we should take home? What are the things we should be eating? Maybe even growing more stuff. When I was a kid, everybody had a garden. We had a huge garden. I don't see anybody have gardens anymore. We need more gardens. But for me, if there's a huge talk right now about the healthcare cost in this country, and it's kind of silly when I think about this stuff I'm talking about, because we could easily save. I mean, look, I saved $205,000 worth of medical costs by not doing it anymore and taking a different road that didn't have all this expense. So if I no longer cost the system $205,000, as was evident here, well, if we had 4 people do that, that's almost $1 million in savings. So when I think about this argument we're having in this country about healthcare costs, well, the healthcare costs could be half of what they are if we focused on being healthy first instead of trying to feed people a bunch of pills because we think they're ill. For me, I just can't imagine how much money our healthcare systems would save if more people did what I've discovered and got rid of this piece of paper and just started eating healthy foods. And the reason I think that we're in this situation is because, let's say the meat and dairy industry for one. Those two right there don't want us to know that we shouldn't be eating all their products. And because they are such a huge corporate hold in this country, we're not told by any form of media that we shouldn't be eating the products that they're selling us. So it's an educational piece. If Americans or human beings were told this stuff and educated about it, perhaps when they're growing up, we might not be in this mess where all we're talking about is the cost of healthcare are out of control. Sure, they're out of control. The biggest reason they're out of control is we're a pretty sick nation. Look at ourselves, folks.
What's the solution?
The first solution is education. If people were educated about just these 2 choices I've presented today, a bowl full of pills or a bowl full of organic food, the change would happen rather quickly. But it's interesting to see the real choice that we need to take is one that's constantly under assault, and that's the organic food. And it's why I say constantly under assault is I've repeatedly asked by people, but Jeff, that costs more. It costs more. And if you're not going to eat, meat and stuff like that, how are you going to get your protein? And it's like there's all these fears that are put out to the people by the very industry that wants you to be fearful of what it is I'm doing. I don't think they want you to know. Because if you did know what I found out, you wouldn't be buying very many of their products. And they don't want that. So, yeah, for me, the healthcare costs could easily be cut in half, probably even greater than that, if we paid attention to what it is that we need to do for our bodies to be healthy.
Do you think, would you recommend, and one of the things that one of these episodes I told you about, that I'm doing these different series, did I tell you about the series I'm looking to create? One is nutrition, and the idea that we should start teaching nutrition from first grade as a primary, just as important as English and science and math is nutrition. It's just everything nutrition all the way through. It would just give everybody the nutrition they need, and how to cook, and how to grow, and how to do everything else. So could you talk about what do you think about that idea? And do you think that's a solution, or what do you think would be the way to go? How do we educate people who aren't willing to change or get educated? How do we do it? What's the solution?
Well, I think, something remarkable. I was listening to a radio broadcast recently while I was driving to pick up my son at college, and I heard a local doctor, psychiatric doctor, head of a child psychiatry department, on the radio say, in response to a question, what are some of the things that we're doing, alternative methods of treating folks with mental illness? And she listed a bunch of the things, the common things, yoga and mindfulness and things of that nature. And then she was asked, well, what about nutrition? what effects did nutrition have on mental health issues? And the response this psychiatrist gave was quite astounding, but yet it tells me where the problem is. She said in her medical training, the books and all that stuff didn't talk about nutrition and how nutrition affects the mind and the mental health. It was absent in all of their trainings. And my belief has been right along that that's intentional. The information is out there, so if it's not in the books that the psychiatrists are getting, then why? But this psychiatrist on the radio said, I really don't know enough about nutrition as it relates to mental health. And she said the odd thing is a lot of my clients that I work with come to me in my office and they know more about it than I do. And I'm like, bingo. So I feel it's intentionally been left out of the medical journals that these doctors are learning from, so they don't learn about it. They don't learn what I've just discovered because they're not being told it. So if they're not being told it, how in the world are we ever going to learn when we go visit a doctor? So yes, I think it's something that should be, like math and English and history. We should have another class that's mandatory called nutrition. And it should start at an early age, and it's only going to be until many years after that that we actually see the benefits of such a process, because once we grow a generation of people that have an awareness about the effects of what they eat compared to how they feel and how their body runs, then we will grow a bunch of parents who will then teach their kids these very same things, and it will be a generational thing that people will just grow up knowing this stuff eventually once it's been let out of the hat, so to speak.
It's almost like a return of knowledge. It's like the old knowledge is lost. This innate knowledge that we had, or we were taught. Our grandfathers were taught, let's say.
Yeah.
And it's sort of lost. We've lost it, right? I mean,
it's been lost, and one of the biggest reasons it was lost was, I forget the gentleman's name, but he was a head of agriculture in the U.S. government, and he made a big shift in the agriculture business in this country, and his focus was, I want everybody to be able to afford food in this country, and that's when the chemicals and everything came in. An effort to cut down on weeds and all that stuff. If we get a bigger yield, then maybe we can sell food for less money. So that's what kind of drove this whole thing was, yield, profits within the farm world. That's what brought us to this mess we've got now.
how do we solve, some of the hunger issues that still happen in this country? There are children still, that are in Maine, they're still like eating terribly and not eating enough and still, almost starving.
Well, one of the first things that comes to my mind is we've got our priorities all mixed up. I mean, we just recently dropped a $355 million bomb on a country that poses no threat to us at all. I think that $355 million for that silly bomb could feed an awful lot of people. So we as a nation need to collectively have good, healthy food and wellness as a priority. And right now it's not a priority. And it's not a priority because there's nothing put in front of the consumer to give them the opportunity for this educational process so that they can make informed decisions. I mean, I can still choose, even today, which of these I want. It's my choice. But the interesting thing, really, that I want to share with you folks is finding myself to this world. The professionals didn't point me to this. They only pointed me to this. I find that most interesting. That this is what's led me to wellness, and I was never even talked about it. It was never discussed. Food, nutrition, never talked about in 5.5 years of my mental health journey. Not once. Not once. And I guess when I listened to that doctor on the radio, Well, it's not in our training. It's no wonder they don't talk about it. They don't know anything about it.
What do you think we're going to be like if we don't change things?
Well,
And maybe set it up like you don't hear my question. If we don't change things.
well, if we don't change things, then this conversation or debate, for instance, that we've been having in this country for the last 8 years about Obamacare is just never going to go away. And it's going to get ugly. The sicker and more unhealthy we get, the more costly it's going to become. And I went to Liverpool a number of years ago, and one of the interesting observations I made there was it was awful easy to spot an American while I was in Liverpool. I could spot a tourist not because of what they wore, but because of how large they were. The people in Liverpool are pretty fit. And all the tourists that were from America, for the most part, at least the ones that were obvious, were very ill looking, extremely obese and overweight. And it was a stark difference. I was like, wow, I'm in a different country. And apparently this country isn't doing the same things we're doing in our country, because I could see the difference. And you only had to verify it by going up, talk to somebody. Well, they have an English accent or they don't. Yeah, they're from America, all right. I could tell that from across the street. We don't look very well.
But the English are known for bad food. So that's ironic.
It is ironic, but I'm thinking maybe they don't eat an awful lot of this sugary products that we're eating. I mean, we just consume tons of soda in this country. That right there leads to obesity, the sugar that's in the soda.
So if you had a parting thought for the audience, what would that be?
I guess my parting thought that I'd like to share with folks today is be curious. Be curious about what you're eating and what effects it might have. Again, my last comparison in the auto repair world. The gas tank in your car is just the same thing as my stomach. It's where the product goes that provides the fuel for the car to run. The stomach is where we put the fuel to run the body, but in the car world, if I put kerosene in my gasoline-driven automobile because somebody gave me 5 gallons and it was free, so it was like, this is cheap food, let me pour that in my gas tank. We wouldn't be so surprised a couple of blocks later when we're driving down the road that this car isn't running very well. It's sluggish, it doesn't want to get off the couch, it can barely move, it can do all those kind of human-like symptoms. So it just amazes me that the car has a stomach, but if we put things that the car doesn't run well on in the car's stomach, it doesn't take us 50 years to figure it out. But we don't have that same connection. And that's what I hope people would be curious enough to think, what am I putting in my gas tank? And given the things that I put in my gas tank, how's my car running? How's this engine running? This engine. And I found, just like in the auto repair world, when we don't put the proper fuel in the automobile, it's not going to run to its maximum output. It's going to be sluggish, hard to start, stalls at intersections, got no power, can barely get out of its own way. That's just how I was feeling. So that's kind of like my parting thought. If you want your engine to run at maximum output, let's be a little more curious about what we're willing to put in our gas tank, known as our stomach.